Do your accent tap hi-hat 16th patterns tend to flatten out as you add kick and snare, kind of like this? Or do you have trouble just getting the kick and the snare to lock with that period when you're playing them, like this? Where there's flamming and it just doesn't quite want to sync up, and it definitely doesn't feel smooth and in the pocket. Know that you're not alone. I've been working on these same challenges with some of my one-on-one students, and I faced this a lot in my playing, and so I've had to work on finding some solutions and ways to target what's actually going on here so that you can fix this stuff. So today we're discussing how to make sure your right-hand timekeeping pattern is smooth with the accent tap, and make sure every kick note and every snare note locks in exactly with it, whether it's on a beat or it's on an offbeat, no matter what it is that you're playing. You can do this because you're going to know the exact steps and how to practice this. So let's go. Hey, welcome to the Non-Glamorous Drummer. This is a channel where we're all about teaching you the core skills that really matter, that really get you results. And we're all about helping you know your next step. So grab my free guide, my free gift to you in the description that is going to help you with exactly that. It's called your Drumming Progress Blueprint, and it really is your blueprint to success because we've laid out the entire drumming journey in 6 stages. You can identify which stage you're in right now, from beginner to stage 6 session drummer, regardless of whether or not you want to be a session drummer. The idea is that we want to be able to be a session drummer and have full mastery over our instrument. So pick up the guide, identify which stage you're in, and you'll see action steps that'll show you exactly what you need to practice to level up to the next stage. So this helps so much with setting short-term goals and long-term goals and knowing how to reach those big goals, ultimately reach your drumming dreams. This guide's been helping a bunch of people. I know it's going to help you too, so go grab it. All right, on with today's lesson. The first thing we have to ask ourselves here is this a technical issue or a coordination issue? If we're struggling with our hi-hat 16th grooves not being tight enough, where there's just a little bit of sloppiness, things may be flamming or not quite lining up, or the 16th pattern with the right hand is flattening out and not staying consistent. The question is it a problem with what our hand is doing, whether that's our right hand or our left hand if we're a lefty or playing open-handed, or is it an issue with the kick drum or the snare and where it's landing? So is this a coordination, just overall problem, or is it an issue with just the right hand? So we want to troubleshoot, we want to figure out which is it so that we know what to target and specifically what to practice. And ultimately we're going to hit all of this in this lesson, so don't worry. We're going to figure out what your issue is, what the problem is, and we're going to solve it. So of course the first question is, how is your accent tap pattern on the hi-hat? Like if you just sit here with whichever hand you're using for timekeeping and you don't have to play it super fast, just a relaxed tempo. How does that sound? How does that feel? Is your hand relaxed? Are you doing the Moeller kind of motion the way you're supposed to, where it's kind of that down, up, down, up, down, up, where you're kind of getting a 2 for the price of 1? Not really, because you're having to, do this motion, but it should be pretty relaxed, where you're not having to, we definitely don't want that going on. So this is just the first thing I want you to do. How is it feeling? Have you worked on your Moeller 2-stroke? Is that pretty smooth? Let's assume that it is. Now we're going to come back to later in the video if there's an issue with the grip, with the technique. We're going to cover that. But for now, let's assume that, okay, the timekeeping hand is okay, the technique's all right, maybe we can improve it a little bit, but there's not really any issues. So let's say we've got a smooth timekeeping pattern going on. So let's rule that out and say, okay, that's not the problem. The issue is something with the kick and the snare, and that's what we want to dig into. Well, here's my guess for what's going on. Most of the time, so if you play just a straight, simple kick snare, if that's the pattern you're playing, it's probably fine, right? Because you're just playing the kick on 1 and 3 and the snare on 2 and 4. So nothing crazy, but my speculation here, what I've seen in myself and in my students, is that if you do something like this, when you start throwing in things that are syncopated like that, sometimes this will happen. Where either the right hand pattern starts to even out because you're trying to make sure you can hear those taps and make sure they sync up, or there's just a lot of just a lot of chaotic, sloppy flamming going on. These are super common problems, so don't worry, you're not alone. This was a big issue in my playing, and I've seen it in students, and so we're always working to fix this and tighten things up. Most of the time, the core issue here is that anytime we have to lock in a snare note or a kick note with a tap on the hi-hat, chaos ensues. It's one thing to lock the kick with an accent, or lock the snare with an accent, but as soon as we go, we end up with weird flam things like that, where the kick just doesn't want to lock in with the tap. So that's what we want to target. Here's what I want you to do first. This is super simple, super basic, and sounds super easy, but it might not be. This is deceivingly difficult for a lot of people because this involves something called dynamic independence. We want to play at the same time with our right hand and our right foot. We're just going to play together, right hand and right foot, but we're going to do different dynamics. We want to play the kick drum loudly, right hand on the hi-hat softly. Like that. So you almost don't hear this. The sound of the hi-hat should be buried by the sound of your kick. So you barely even hear the hi-hat because you're just playing a very light tap. That's all. But at the same time, you're playing a loud kick drum. So you should be able to hear if anything's not quite tight, like in those examples I had the hi-hat just a little bit late. You could hear that flamming. Or if it's a little early, because it's such a short, tight sound, because we're playing it lightly on top, and so you can tell if it's not locking up. But if it is, you'll barely hear it because it'll be buried by the kick drum. So practice doing that, and if you want to go the extra mile, practice doing it with either hand, right hand or left hand. But starting out, your primary timekeeping hand, whichever that is, do that one. And so what we're essentially doing here is building dynamic independence, your ability to play at one dynamic here, a totally opposite dynamic down there. And that's one of those things that don't give yourself a hard time if you have a hard time with this, because it's deceivingly difficult. It's one thing for me to show it to you and say, do this. You might be like, yeah, I can do that. And you sit down and you try it, and it's like, wait a second. Well, that's still kind of loud. Let's go softer. Okay, well, now the kick's too soft. We want to keep the kick loud, but have this soft. Make sure you're using a small stick height. That definitely helps. If you're starting up here, it's going to be too loud. So have a low stick height, but still stay strong on the kick. So hopefully I haven't beaten that point to death. But I want you to understand that that can be tough. It can be hard, so take it easy on yourself till you get that. That's our step one. So we want to make sure we can play a soft tap here while playing a loud note on the kick. Now we want to dive fully into this, and we want to play that 16th accent tap pattern on the hats, playing the kick on the offbeats, locking in with the taps like this. Starting out, go super slow like that. We're not concerned with tempo. We're concerned with coordination and consistency, dynamic consistency, making sure your accents are strong, but that your taps are soft, that your strong kick drum notes lock in with the taps. And if they're sloppy, just go even slower. However slow you gotta go, no shame in that. My recommended tempo for this, maybe a first goal tempo, is actually 16ths at 35 or 8ths at 70, if that makes a little more sense. So here's 8ths at 70. That's a good goal tempo. Now, that might be kind of quick. That might be way too quick for you. That's okay. Start even slower. Go like 8ths at 50, or go no metronome at first and just practice until those taps are consistently soft and the kick is consistently loud and locked in with them, and then gradually work your way up. Because what we've got to do here is establish dynamic consistency of loud, soft, and be able to do that even if the kick is landing with the soft notes. That's the goal. So work your way up to 8th notes at 70 or 16ths at 35 with the goal of just continuing to push up the tempo until you can eventually play something like Because that's our goal. We want to be able to play something musical and like we might typically play in a groove or hear in a song, and it still be nice and tight. So that's our goal, but be patient. Know it might take some time to get there. Now, we're not done. That's definitely a big part, making sure the kick locks in, but we don't want to forget about the left hand, because in a lot of these grooves, if we're playing something like we want to make sure left hand can also lock in with that. So repeat the same thing, but with left hand on the snare. So practice playing that soft tap with maybe a loud left hand note, like. You might find it easier to move right hand over to the ride for this. Whichever you'd rather do, but practice playing softly with the timekeeping hand, loudly on the snare, so that then we can go into our same step 2 that we did with the bass drum, which is same story where you don't really hear that soft note even if it's on the ride because the snare is loud. Side note, when I'm playing a loud note on the snare with a tap on the right hand, I always like to get my right hand out of the way. If I'm playing a busy 16th kind of groove, like, I would always rather get my right hand out here out of the way rather than trying to cross over. No problem in doing that. Feel free to do that. Or if you're playing open-handed, you can avoid the issue altogether, which is totally cool. So practice playing. All the while, you're really not hearing the tap because the snare is nice and strong and it's burying it just like with the kick. Gradually get that up in tempo so that eventually you can sit here and play. Now, with the snare version of this especially, practice also ghosting on the snare. Because that's probably the more practical musical application where you might be playing. Where you want to be able to lock those ghost notes in too. So also practice it that way. But you can sit here and go back and forth between doing it with kick and then doing it with snare and just make an exercise out of it just like that. And by the way, I've got the notation for this in a PDF that you can go download. And so go check out that notation so it gives you the written exercise version of this so you can take that to your practice room, print it out, whatever you want to do, and know exactly what to practice. Eventually, once you get super comfortable with this, super solid with this, that means that you've got the key ingredients here established to play any kind of syncopation. Because that means if we're counting 1 E and 2 E, you're able to play the kick on all the E's and U's, same with the left hand. So that means you could play something like, or even faster. And then if you want to go the extra mile with this, so just to throw something else at you, don't be in a hurry to get to here, but you can also practice this swung. That is its own challenge, but that's just something else that you can shoot for once you've gotten it down straight. Straight is significantly easier. We'll talk about that now. Once you've worked through all that, you know that, okay, coordination is coming together. You're making sure that you know how to lock the kick and the snare with the taps. But back to the first thing that we mentioned, what if there's an issue with the right hand? What if maybe your taps aren't actually happening halfway in between the accents like they should? Like maybe you want it to sound like this, but maybe it actually sounds like, where sometimes those taps just come a little early, or maybe it's actually getting a little bit swung by accident. And it's just not consistent. So if that's an issue, if that's going on with your right hand, then that really needs to be solved before we even talk about locking in the kick and the snare, because it's going to be hard to get the kick and the snare locked with a moving target. It's literally like the target is just moving and shifting constantly. You never know where that tap's going to land, so you don't know where left hand's got to play on the snare and where right foot's got to play. So if that's an issue, we definitely need to address that and make sure that right hand or whichever timekeeping hand is doing what it's supposed to and that pattern is smooth and steady. What I would recommend you do, this is what I've done with several of my one-on-one coaching students who have had this issue, because it's hard to just play a smooth accent tap 16th pattern. I think that's something that sets a lot of the best drummers in the world apart from a lot of drummers where maybe their groove doesn't feel quite as good. It's that those best drummers, they have this relaxed way of playing those 16ths. So they just float along effortlessly, and they're just naturally in time. And a lot of that comes from motion and staying loose, staying relaxed. And so what I like to have my students do is actually start on a pad. Because if you think about it, this doesn't need to be too complicated. That tap is a result of the initial stroke. Like if I sit here and I just go, let the stick bounce and then drop naturally, well, there's an accent tap. I'm gripping nice and loosely. And if I put a little more pressure on the stick, it'll happen more quickly. Or if I'm super loose, I'm basically just letting the stick freely pivot, move within my hand. Now what we can do, as that tap happens, we can then lift up in preparation for the next accent. Like that. So now we're beginning to close the gap. We're getting closer to what we want. And so now if we can make that even more seamless, and then eventually settle into, okay, here's the tempo we want, here's the motion. So literally as the stick goes down for the tap, my hand's going up in preparation for the next accent. Loud, soft, loud, soft, loud, soft, loud. So all the while staying super loose. Be nice and loose. And actually, if you're staying loose, as you get a little faster, it might actually feel a little bit easier. It'll start to feel kind of natural and almost just autopilot, and that's what you want. And so if you're having any kind of struggle, any kind of issue with this pattern, this is where I want you to live for at least a few weeks. And maybe this is something you need to continually practice for months. It's hard to put a time limit on this and say that, okay, this takes 2 months to master or 2 weeks to master, because it's been such a lifelong process for me where I know that early on in my playing, I was able to do accent tap patterns. They just didn't feel great. And so it wasn't until years later I really started working them and figuring out how can I make this feel better. And so it's been a very long process, but I hope I can accelerate it for you. Start on your pad and just do a lot of this. Remembering to let that tap just be a natural rebound. So you're not going bump, 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 bump. We're just being nice and relaxed about it. And so if you can get this smooth on your pad, basically practicing this on a pad forces you to be really loose and really relaxed because you're getting this extra rebound that allows you to do that. Because of the rebound, we can be super relaxed here, even as we get going faster. And eventually, once you can get to here on your pad, great. But of course, be patient with it because that's going to take some time. Live at the slow tempos. Know that the secret to speed with anything on the drums is always that repetitive practice slowly. If you can establish the mechanics of your grip, the motion that your hand and wrist are doing, your brain learns that at slower tempos. The only way to really master that is at a slow tempo. And once you've established that foundation, well, then you can build your house on top of that. But if you're trying to build the house and you kind of skipped over the foundation, it's all going to fall apart when a mudslide happens. And so be patient with it and know that it's a process and that you've got to log significant time playing very slowly. Speed is not the ultimate, well, it's the ultimate goal. It's not the immediate goal, that's what I mean. Not the immediate goal, though it is the ultimate goal. There's also a lot of songs, though, where we need to play this slowly, so you don't want to just get good at it. There's a lot of songs where we got to just relax and play a nice slow accent tap pattern. So be versatile with it, and relaxation is the key. So spend time on your pad doing that. Then transition to the hats. The only difference here is that on the hi-hats we don't get the same kind of rebound if we're using the edge. Now you could play purely on the top with the hats closed tight, and it's pretty much the identical feel, lots of rebound. But I like the sound better of using the edge for the accent, top for the tap. So edge, top, edge, top. So you lose some rebound, but it's not necessarily a bad thing because you get a tiny bit of rebound, which puts the stick right here, ready to play a gentle tap When that tap happens, your hand comes up and then you're ready for the next accent. So in slow motion, it's literally this. Kind of like the sticks hinging, like right here. Down, up, and that's it. We don't need a lot of rebound because we need the stick close to the hats to play that tap. So it's totally fine that we don't get much rebound when we're on the edge. Of course, the speed will come naturally as long as you're staying loose and you're logging the time, the repetition at those slow tempos. Be listening to it, pay attention to how your hi-hat pattern feels. How does it sound? Is it smooth? Is it relaxed? Are you loose? Film yourself doing it. Set up a camera over here. Film yourself slow motion because every smartphone will do that. So you've got the technology at your fingertips, so take advantage of it. Watch your hand, evaluate yourself, and figure out how can I be even looser. And so practice that. That is so worth practicing. And do it with your weak hand also. Tip for overcoming the weak hand. Practice this with your weak hand, which helps a lot with snare ghosting, which helps a lot with blues shuffle patterns and being able to do more stuff with your left hand on the snare. So we're not just training the right hand, because the left hand needs to be very capable also if we want to be versatile and play what we want to play. So practice it with both hands. Maybe start with that strong hand because it's going to learn it more quickly, and then spend some time with the weak hand too. So once you've done that, we know that, okay, we've eliminated timekeeping technique for being the issue, and we know that, okay, that's nice and smooth. Then you can dig back into the whole coordination exercise that we covered today of playing, doing that, and because now the target's no longer moving. The target is fixed, it is right there, and you know what you're shooting for. Your kick drum foot knows exactly what it needs to lock with, and that's what we want. So as I'm always saying, be patient. Know that you can do all of this. Like you can master that timekeeping pattern, you can master tightness in your 16th grooves, but you've got to be patient with it. Know that it's a process, it takes some time. I've been working at this for a long time, but when you're targeting these key areas, these key weak spots, you're really going to accelerate this. And so if you follow everything I've shared with you today, taught you today, go download the notation guides, you can take it to your practice room. I guarantee you're going to grow, and this will speed up your growth because you're targeting those specific things that are probably the weak spots that are causing the trouble. So you solve the things that are causing the trouble, then you eliminate the trouble. Everything comes together. It becomes musical and fun. And yeah, fun. Musical and fun, that's what we want. Because you want to use this when you're playing songs. You want to be able to have fun with it and jam and just relax and have an autopilot right hand and have everything fall into place. So I hope that you're encouraged. I hope that you've got all the resources you need here, because I want you to be empowered to go and accomplish this. Get to your practice room, take action. You guys who take action are the heroes here. You're the ones making all the progress and telling me about your results, telling me about your success stories. That's the kind of stuff I want to hear, and it's so encouraging to hear that from so many of you guys. So keep up the good work, keep up the practicing, and of course, while you're here, download that guide I told you about earlier, because that's going to help you out even more with getting you quick results because of knowing exactly what to practice. Grab the guide, identify which stage you're in, whether it's stage 1 beginner, or stage 2 grooving drummer, or stage 3 jamming drummer, stage 4 gigging drummer, stage 5 improvising drummer, or stage 6 session drummer. Figure out which of those 6 you're in right now. Check out the action steps, click the links to further resources, and progress, get results, make progress. Can't wait to hear about your progress. So go download that, it's totally free. As always, thanks so much for watching, guys. If you're new to the channel, be sure to subscribe. Have a great week. I will see you on the next lesson.